The NFL is brimming with talent, including a new crop of superstars and underappreciated players who don't get the credit they deserve. However, there are many players who are overpriced. Who are these individuals? Well, overrated does not always imply inferior. It simply means that these players aren't living up to the hype, whether fair or unfair. In today's video, we look at each team's most overrated fantasy player. The first place we have Cowboys. Dalton Schultz. TE is the most overrated fantasy player. Dalton Schultz is the very worst player available at ADP right now. He'll be a solid fantasy player and will most likely end as a top 10 TE. But there's no reason he should be selected numerous rounds ahead of his rivals. Moving on at number 2, Daniel Jones, QB in Giants. If we're being sincere, there isn't a single player of the Giants club that merits a higher grade than he now has. Despite having a solid average draft position, ADP, I believe Daniel Jones is the most overrated Giants player, although most of the fantasy community appears to be obsessed with him. This is because Jones has shown to be an excellent pass catcher. In reality, he has a tremendous amount of untapped potential. He will likely have a few matches where he scores more than 30 points. As a result, you don't have to make educated guesses about when he'll be good, making him more attractive in the leagues that play the best ball. Despite finishing outside the top 20 in total points scored in 3 of his 4 seasons, he concluded the most recent year of his career with average points per game ranking of number 18. Although he hasn't played a complete season yet, that stands out. Ranked the third is Miles Sanders, RB in Eagles. Adding A.J. Brown to the offense will result in a greater emphasis on passing the ball. Miles Sanders, who did not score any touchdowns despite playing on the run-heaviest team in the NFL, 49.9% run rate in the previous season, will now be responsible for defending against a passing attack. In addition, he still possesses Jalen Hurts, who may take essential goal line carries, and Kenneth Gainwell, who is making a name for himself in training camp. Moving on at number 4, Commanders. Antonio Gibson, RB, is the most overrated fantasy player. The trajectory that Antonio Gibson has been on cannot be reversed. However, the youth Brian Robinson, in whom the Commanders spent a day 2 decision, has excelled and has been on the rise swiftly. Although he lost a fumble in the opening game of the preseason for the squad, Gibson will not be liable for any more passing responsibilities because the team has decided to keep J.D. McKissic as the starting quarterback. Gibson has to be one of the running backs on your squad who is giving you a lot of cause for concern at this point in the game. Following that, Rams wide receiver Allen Robinson is the most overrated fantasy player. Below, Allen Robinson is currently ranked as the 18th wide receiver by ADP, but only 2 of our 7 rankers have him inside the top 20 here at FTN. The WR18 price tag is a wager that Robinson will not turn out to be dust. Considering how poorly Robinson performed in the previous year, calls for a leap of faith. WR81 overall with 0 weeks as a top 24 WR. Next at number 6, 49ers, most overrated fantasy player, Deebo Samuel, WR. Deebo Samuel was the fantasy breakout star the previous season, but he is now the leading candidate for a drop-in touchdown, and he may even lose some of his crucial rushing work to rookie dual-threat QB Trey Lance. Samuel was the fantasy breakout star the previous season. Samuel was the most talked about new hero in the last season of the fantasy game. Samuel finished the first half of the previous season tied for 3rd among 49ers receivers in targets, receptions, yards, and receiving touchdowns. It is not in my best interest to utilize a second-round choice to acquire a guy who may be his team's third best target option. This would be a waste of my time and money. Moving on, at number 7, Kyler Murray. The Cardinals quarterback is the most overrated player in fantasy football. Even though Kyler Murray is not awful, there are still a lot of unknowns about this situation, which makes me nervous going into round 5. James Conner will make his comeback to the lineup to take up goal line carriers, while DeAndre Hopkins will be out for the first 6 games of the season. Christian Kirk will no longer be participating in the NFL season. During the final 7 games of the previous season, he was a quarterback who finished ranked among the top 12 in the league only 3 times. Up next, ranked at number 8, Kenneth Walker. The Seahawks running back is the most overrated fantasy player. The most direct route for Kenneth Walker to achieve relevance in this season is for Rashad Penny to be bad. Although this seems to be a genuine possibility, Walker is only selected a few picks after Penny in ADP, and it is doubtful that this offense will be capable of supporting more than one running back, perhaps not even a single one. Moving on, at number 9, the Packers wide receiver Romeo Doubs is the most overrated fantasy player. All of the Packers players are reasonably priced. I believe they are all underpriced since the market overreacted to Davante Adams' departure. Nonetheless, I have to pick someone, so I'll go with Romeo Doubs as the most overrated, as he's begun to go ahead of early round 2 pick WR Christian Watson in fantasy drafts. Ranked at number 10, the Vikings wide receiver Adam Thielen is the most overrated fantasy player. The only talent Adam Thielen possesses is the ability to score touchdowns, and that's about it. And we cannot anticipate that it will continue like this indefinitely, as a result of the fact that Justin Jefferson is getting ready to enter his prime, Irv Smith is going to return to the position of tight end, and KJ Osborne has developed into a legitimate deep threat. Despite Thielen's status as a red zone threat in his own right, the Vikings might not be as dependent on him as they have been in the past. In addition, he will have already reached the age of 32 when the new season begins, and he did not play the entire 2018 season. Next, at number 11, Jamal Williams. The Lions running back is the most overrated fantasy player. No players on the Lions roster are overvalued in fantasy, although Jamal Williams is the most overrated member of the group, given that he is also RB50. Drafting him would not be a waste of resources if he did not live up to expectations, but he isn't the best option, because if DeAndre Swift misses time, his upside isn't nearly as good. He won't be able to replace James Conner as a guy with 20 or more touches, as Conner did for the Cardinals when Edmonds was hurt. Moving on, David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears is the most overrated player in fantasy football. Another squad that does not contain any players that, according to their ADP ranking, are grossly overrated is the Bears. They are all offered at reasonable prices. On the other hand, David Montgomery was selected for this position. Although he did not have the ideal training camp, he was injured and spent some time on special teams and was assigned to play on special teams. There are rumblings that good backup player Khalil Herbert and other players will be required to split playing time to a greater extent than in prior seasons. The Montgomery metropolitan area is drawing ever closer to the flex zone. Ranked number 13, the Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans is the most overrated fantasy player. Mike Evans is outstanding and will continue to be so. However, I believe we are drafting him at the peak of his abilities, WR8. Over the last 5 years, he has finished with the following results: WR17, WR9, WR15, WR13, and WR9. Chris Godwin should not be benched, and the signing of Julio Jones should help the club compensate for the loss of Antonio Brown. At number 14, we have Chuba Hubbard. The Panthers running back is the most overrated fantasy player. In this year's draft, the Panthers will only have 2 players picked in the top 150, Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Chuba Hubbard should not even be considered for selection at this time in the draft because neither of the other players should be deemed overrated at this point. If there is a loss at CMC, D'Onta Foreman is the back you want. Finally, we have the Saints wide receiver Chris Olave is the most overrated fantasy player. Chris Olave is an exciting talent, but it may be difficult for the rookie to find playing time, given that Michael Thomas is expected to return. Alvin Kamara is not going to be suspended, and Jarvis Landry is now in town. It is essential to remember that Jameis Winston threw the ball a shallow 23 times per game in the previous season. Well, that marks the end of our video for today. We hope you loved it and enjoyed it. On your way out, make sure to hit the subscribe button for more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching.